The screaming was the wrong sound for a Tuesday evening at the Rambler. Not because the Rambler didn't have its share of noise. It was a roadside bar and grill outside Callaway, North Carolina. And it had been running on loud music and louder conversations since 1978. But there was a difference between the ordinary sound of a place doing its business and the specific sound of three men screaming at a 76-year-old woman in a corner booth. And everyone in the Rambler understood the difference immediately. You don't belong here. Derek Cole was 29 years old and had been at the bar since 4 and had reached, by 6:45, the specific altitude of drunk confidence at which a person believes the volume of their voice is the same thing as being right. He had both hands on the edge of Beatrice Hayes's booth, and his two friends were positioned behind him like punctuation, and his voice was going across the room in the way that voices go when a man has decided that everyone should hear him. Beatrice Hayes was sitting in her booth with her hands folded on the table and her eyes on Derek Cole, and the expression on her face was the expression of a woman who has seen many things in 76 years and is adding this to the list. The Rambler went quiet. Not the frozen quiet of a room that doesn't know what to do, the specific quiet of a room that does know what to do and is in the process of doing it. In the back section of the Rambler, the 8 tables that the chapter had been using for their Tuesday meeting for 4 years, 23 men in leather cuts had turned in their chairs and were looking at Derek Cole. All of them, at the same moment. Roy Travis set down his coffee. The Rambler Diner and Bar had been on State Route 21 outside Callaway since 1978, and it had the particular smell of 46 years of doing one thing well. A kitchen that had been open every day at 6, and the bar that had been open at noon, and the intersection of both in the way of a place that understood that people needed food and people needed company, and had decided to provide both under one roof. The walls had the photographs of regulars and the neon signs and the handwritten menu boards that had been partially updated every few years and now carried the specific archaeology of 5 decades of prices crossed out and replaced. Roy Travis was the chapter president of the Callaway chapter of the Hells Angels, and he had been coming to the Rambler on Tuesday evenings for 4 years, ever since the chapter had outgrown the room behind the auto parts store where they'd been holding meetings for a decade. The Rambler's owner, a woman named Gail who had bought it from the original family in 2009, had given the chapter the back section on Tuesday evenings, no fee, because the chapter members ate and drank and tipped well, and had never caused her a moment of trouble in 4 years. Roy was 55 years old, chapter president for 7 years, with close-cropped gray hair and the specific build of a man who had done physical work his whole life and was still doing it. He had a mother named Pearl who was 78 and lived alone in Statesville, 90 minutes north, and who came, every time Roy visited, to the door with the specific brightness of someone who has been expecting him and has been looking forward to it and will not say so. He drove to Statesville twice a month. He called on Sundays. He had been doing this since his father died 11 years ago, because Pearl did not ask, and Roy understood that not asking was its own form of asking. He had been watching Derek Cole and his 2 friends since 5:15, when they started getting loud. The chapter had arrived at 5:30. Roy had noted the 3 men at the bar when he walked in, the quality of loud that suggests a slide rather than a fixed point, the kind of noise that increases over time rather than staying constant. He had said nothing. He had ordered the pot roast. He had started the meeting. At 6:30, Beatrice Hayes had arrived. He had known her name for 3 years, not from speaking to her, but because Gail had mentioned her once in the specific way that business owners mention their most faithful regulars. Beatrice Hayes, Tuesday evenings, booth 4, 30 years. Roy had nodded every time he saw her. She had nodded back. They had never spoken. He had seen Derek Cole notice her arrival. He had seen Cole's expression. He had set down his fork. He had picked it up again. He watched. Before we find out what Beatrice Hayes said when Roy Travis walked to her booth, and what happened to the three men who screamed in a room full of people they hadn't properly looked at, hit subscribe and drop your city and state in the comments. I want to know where this reaches today. A kitchen in North Carolina, a living room in Ohio, a back porch in Alberta. Drop your city. I read every one. And if you know what it feels like to be told you don't belong somewhere that is yours, this story is for you. Stay with us. Beatrice Hayes had been coming to the Rambler every Tuesday evening since 1994. She had been 46 years old then, and Curtis had been 49, and they had found the Rambler on a Tuesday in October when they were driving back from visiting his sister in Asheville, and had stopped because Beatrice had said she wasn't cooking after that drive. They had sat in booth 4 because it was open, and because the window looked out on the ridgeline to the west, and because the chicken fried steak was the best thing on the menu, and they had ordered 2 of them and stayed for 2 hours. The following Tuesday, Curtis had said, "Rambler?" And Beatrice had said yes. They had gone every Tuesday for 22 years. Curtis had died in 2016. In March, quietly, and the way that certain people go, suddenly and then completely, and then the world rearranges itself around the space. Beatrice had come to the Rambler the following Tuesday. She had sat in booth 4. She had ordered the chicken fried steak and the sweet tea and the slice of pie. She had eaten alone. She had come back the Tuesday after that, and the one after that, and she had not missed a Tuesday in 8 years since Curtis died. Which is to say she had come to the Rambler 287 times alone. She had not counted this. She did not think in terms of counting numbers. She thought in terms of what the Tuesday evening was, the specific warmth of a room she had been coming to since she was 46 years old, the chicken fried steak, the sweet tea, the pie, the drive home on Route 21 past the places she knew. And she thought, this is still mine. Nothing about Curtis being gone changed whose the Tuesday was. Her daughter Ramona lived in Raleigh and called on Sundays. Ramona had said more than once that she didn't have to keep going to the Rambler by herself, that it might be easier to find somewhere closer or somewhere new. Beatrice had said, "I'm going to the Rambler." She had said it in the tone that was the end of the discussion. The Rambler was hers. The booth was hers. The Tuesday evening was hers. 30 years of Tuesday evenings had made it so in the way that time makes things so, not through legal title, but through the accumulation of presence, the specific ownership of the person who has always been there. She had come in at 6:30, her time, her Tuesday, and she had gone to booth 4, and she had sat down, and Sheila, who had been working Tuesday evenings since 2019, had already put in her sweet tea and her order without Beatrice saying a word, because Sheila knew. Derek Cole had come off his bar stool 10 minutes after Beatrice sat down. Derek Cole had grown up in Callaway, and had stayed in Callaway, and had developed, by 29, the specific territoriality of a man who believes that a place belonging to him is a matter of his wanting it to belong to him. He had been at the Rambler bar since 4 with his friends Corey and Jesse, and by 6 o'clock the bar had become, in his mind, his bar. And by 6:30 the addition of an elderly woman sitting alone in booth 4 had struck him as an imposition on the space he had decided was his for the evening. He had looked at her from the bar. He had said something to Corey. They had both laughed. Then he had gotten off the stool. He walked to booth 4. He stood at the edge of the table. "This table's taken," he said. He did not look at Beatrice as he said it. He looked at the table. "I've been sitting at this table every Tuesday for 30 years, Beatrice said. She said it evenly, the way a woman says a fact she is not going to argue about. Derek looked at her then. "It's taken tonight," he said. "Old lady, you need to find somewhere else." Beatrice folded her hands on the table. She looked at Derek Cole with the expression of a woman who has been addressed in precisely this way before, and has understood each time that there is no response that reaches people who have decided not to be reached. She said, "I'll finish my meal, and then I'll go." She was not going to leave her booth. She was not going to be moved from the table she had been sitting at with Curtis and alone for 30 years. She was going to finish her meal, and she was going to stay in her seat, and she was going to manage Derek Cole the way she had managed difficult things for 76 years, by being present and steady and unmoved by volume. Derek put his hand flat on the table. His two friends had come over from the bar. They arranged themselves on both sides of the booth. The geometry of it was specific and deliberate. 3 men, 1 old woman, and the surrounding of her intended to communicate that the geometry itself was the message. "We're not asking," Derek said. The 3 of them had been drinking since 4. They had looked, when they arrived at the Rambler, at the men in the back section, in the leather cuts, and they had categorized them as those guys and then turned back to the bar. This was the specific failure of a certain kind of attention. They had seen 23 riders and had decided in 3 seconds that they had enough information, and they had not looked again. This was about to cost them. Derek's voice had been rising for several minutes. Sheila had come to the edge of the back section and looked at Roy, and Roy had shaken his head. Not yet. He was watching the stages. He had been watching the stages for 20 minutes, since Cole first got off the bar stool, and he knew the shape of what was happening, and he was waiting for the point of no return, and he had learned, over a long career of knowing when to move, that moving too early was its own kind of failure. The point of no return was when Derek leaned over the table, and his voice carried to every corner of the Rambler. "You don't belong here." It was a scream. Not raised. A scream. It filled the room. It landed in every corner and on every face, and it landed most specifically on Beatrice Hayes, who froze for one moment, not from fear, but from the specific shock of a cruelty arriving in a place she had considered safe, and then stilled herself deliberately. The way she stilled herself when difficult things came. She sat in booth 4, with her hands folded, and her hands were trembling slightly, and she did not move. And her face went through something that was not fear, but the specific devastation of a person being told, in the most explicit possible terms, in the place that was most specifically theirs, that they are not welcome in it. Her chin came down slightly. Her eyes did not fill. She was not going to cry in front of Derek Cole. The room went silent. Roy Travis was already standing. He did not walk fast. He walked from the back section of the Rambler to booth 4 at the pace of a man who has decided what he is doing and does not need to hurry to do it. He was not a large man in any conventional sense, not tall, not enormous, but he had the specific quality of deliberate forward motion that does something to a room, and what it did to the Rambler as he crossed it was to make everything else in the room go still. He stopped beside booth 4. He stood between Beatrice and Derek Cole, not close enough to be a threat, close enough to be a statement. He looked at Derek. "She's been here longer than you have," he said. Derek looked at him. He looked at the cut. He was 29 and drunk, and had been a certain kind of man for long enough that his first instinct was to escalate. He opened his mouth. Roy said, "You'll want to look around the room." Derek Cole looked around the room. He saw the back section of the Rambler, which he had looked at once at 4 o'clock and categorized and moved on from. He saw it properly for the first time. 23 men in leather cuts, most of whom had turned in their chairs and were looking at him with the patient, unhurried attention of people who are prepared to keep looking until they have no further reason to look. None of them stood. None of them moved toward him. They looked. Derek's two friends had also looked, and they had arrived at their calculation faster than Derek had, because they had been drinking less and were therefore able to perform arithmetic more quickly. Corey said, "Derek." Derek looked at Roy. He looked at Beatrice. He looked at the room. Something shifted in his face. The specific deflation of someone whose confidence was constructed entirely from the assumption that they were unobserved, and who has discovered they were wrong. He stepped back from the table. He did not say anything else. He walked back to the bar. He collected his jacket. His friends were already ahead of him. The door closed behind them. The room held its breath for one moment after the door closed. Then the silence broke, not noisily, not with cheering or commentary, but with the specific exhale of a space returning to its own business. The conversations in the front section started up again. Sheila appeared at booth 4 with the sweet tea she had been holding for 6 minutes and asked Beatrice if she was all right. Beatrice said she was fine. She said it in the tone of a woman who means it. Roy Travis remained beside the booth. "Mrs. Hayes," he said. Beatrice looked at him. "Roy Travis," he said. "I've been meaning to introduce myself for 3 years." She looked at him for a moment. "You nod," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "So do I," she said. She extended her hand. He shook it. "Sit down," she said. "Sheila, bring this man something." Roy sat across from Beatrice Hayes in booth 4 of the Rambler Diner, and they talked for 40 minutes, which was a record for both of them. Roy, who did not usually stay after the chapter meeting wound down, and Beatrice, who usually left by 8. She told him about Curtis. He told her about Pearl. She told him about Tuesday evenings, what they had been and what they were now, and he listened in the way he had learned from being someone people brought things to. Fully, without hurrying, without deciding what they meant before she was finished saying them. When she asked him how he had known, how he had seen it coming, he said he'd been watching since 5:15. She said, "You could have done it sooner." He said, "I wanted to give him the chance to be a better person." She looked at him. Did he take it? "He ran out of time," Roy said. Beatrice picked up her fork. She was quiet for a moment. "My Curtis would have liked you," she said. Roy said, "I'd have liked to meet him." The chapter meeting had concluded at 8:30, the regular time. The business of the chapter done in the efficient way of an organization that has been meeting on Tuesday evenings for long enough to know how to use the time well. Roy had gone back to the meeting at 7 after the conversation, and Beatrice had finished her dinner and her pie. At 9, she asked for her check. Sheila came back from the register and said it had been handled. Beatrice looked at Sheila. "Who handled it?" she said. Sheila gestured toward the back section. Beatrice looked. The chapter was getting ready to leave. The specific organized movement of 23 people preparing to exit a space together. Several of them caught her eye as they went. One of them, she did not catch his name, stopped beside her booth and said, "Same time next Tuesday, Mrs. Hayes." She looked at him. "Same time next Tuesday," she said. Engines, 23 of them, starting in the Ramblers parking lot at 9:15, one by one, the sound of them building through the diner's front windows, filling the room from outside with the particular organized sound of a group leaving together. Beatrice Hayes was at booth 4 with her second cup of tea, which Sheila had brought without asking. And she sat and listened to the engines start in sequence, and she watched the headlights sweep across the front window of the Rambler as the column moved out of the parking lot and turned south on Route 21. The sound of them faded down the road. Beatrice whispered something, not to Sheila, not to the room, to the window where the last headlights had swept across and gone. She pressed her lips together. She looked at her tea, the front section, which had gone through something that would be talked about at several tables for weeks, finding its way back to ordinary. The music from the speakers. The sound of the kitchen, the particular warmth of a room that has been doing what it does for a long time. Beatrice finished her tea. She looked at the window. She looked at the empty bar section where 3 men had been, who were gone, and who had not understood that the room they were in was not theirs to control. She picked up her purse. She put on her coat. She went to the door. Sheila held it. She always holds it, Beatrice said. Yes, ma'am, Sheila said. Beatrice went out into the September evening, and she drove home on Route 21, which was the route she had been driving home on after Tuesday evenings for 30 years, past the hardware store and the church and the field where the old tobacco barn had stood until it came down in a storm in 2019. She drove home and she pulled into her driveway, and she sat in the car for a moment before she went inside. She whispered Curtis's name once, in the car, the way she sometimes did at the end of Tuesday evenings, a brief accounting, a reporting in, a way of including him in what had happened. She thought about Curtis. She thought about 30 years of Tuesday evenings and the one that had come and gone tonight. She thought about the man who had said her name, Mrs. Hayes, and the nod they had been exchanging for 3 years, and the 40 minutes of conversation that had settled something she had not known needed settling. She went inside. She made her cup of chamomile tea, which she did every Tuesday when she got home, and she sat at the kitchen table and she drank it. Next Tuesday she would go back. She always went back. That was the whole of the point. If this story found something in you, if you believe that the place you belong is the one you keep showing up to, and that the person who tells you you don't belong there is wrong, share this today with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you never miss the next story. And leave a comment. Have you ever been told you don't belong somewhere that was yours? Or have you ever been the person who stood up and said, without drama, without theater, that someone belongs exactly where they are? Tell us. Type yours in the comments if this one stayed with you, because some places belong to the people who show up every Tuesday for 30 years. That's who belongs there.